I have the absolute privilege to introduce our next presenter, Joel Bray. Joel is a proud Wiradjuri man who's danced in Europe and Australia with CDC, Colburn, Francesco dance companies, and just recently Chunky Move. I've had the pleasure of being a choreographer in residence with the gorgeous Joel Bray in Darkinjung country at the National Aboriginal Islander Skills Development Association, formerly known as Native Dance College. He is an extraordinary man, and how lucky are we to have him here today. Joel's work, Biladungarang, Dalawala Gangara, and Daddy have toured Brisbane, Sydney, Darwin, Midsummer, Auckland, Live Works, Dance Massive Festivals, and the Arts Centre of Melbourne. Joel, in 2019, was the National Library of Australia's Creative Arts Fellow and continues his Burabang. You're going to have to pull me up on that one, Joel.
Burabang, you got it right.
Yes, Burabang. Research into Wiradjuri ceremony as Chunky Move's inaugural choreographer in residence. Joel's work springs from his Wiradjuri cultural heritage and innate encounters in unorthodox spaces in which audience members are invited as co-storytellers to explore experiences of a fair-skinned Aboriginal people and of gay men in an increasingly digital and isolated world. We are thrilled to have with us the one and only Joel Bray. Take it away, my brother.
Yiradul Marang. Thanks, Ian. Nice to see you.
Manangu.
Ian and I go back way back. I remember Ian coming into the studio when I was a student at NASDA, and you were still in high school, and learning cultural dance with us, with the dancers down from Yirrkala. That was a really long time ago now.
And you had wonderful, colourful ties, and Tim Bishop was there. And of course, I was not wagging at all.
No, you were doing cultural business. Totally.
That's right. Joel, take it away.
Thanks, Ian. Yiradul Marang, everyone. Hi out there. I'm dialing in from the sacred, unceded and ancient lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people down here in Naarm in Melbourne. I'm in my house because I just tested positive for COVID. It finally caught up with me, but no symptoms so far, so good. I'm super excited to be here with you today and share a little bit about my arts practice and about the work that I made for the gallery. So my name's Joel Bray. My father is Christopher Kirkbright, who was kind of a big deal in the land rights movement in New South Wales back in the 80s. We are Wiradjuri through my grandmother Ethel. We're of the Duran clan, which is up around Dubbo way. But I grew up in Orange, which is in kind of smack bang in the middle of Wiradjuri country. And I came to dance quite late. I was a terrible student at Sydney Uni, wagging classes and not having any kind of motivation. And then I started going along to dance classes at NASDA, which Ian just mentioned, and fell in love and discovered dancing. And so I've had this kind of career that's taken me all over the world. And then I really was homesick, and I decided to come home about 5 or 6 years ago because I really had lost connection with my family and with my culture. You know, being fair-skinned overseas, you know, you just end up having the conversation about being Aboriginal because it's too difficult. So yeah, I came home about 5 years ago. I've been dancing with Chunky Move at the time, and I also started to make my own work. And the first work I made was called Biladungarang. So we'll just show that first video. Thanks.
Thank you. So cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's just really nice to be able to know you can randomly meet 14 people in the bar downstairs and invite them up to your hotel room and they'll come. It's awesome. It might have been the moment before I told him as my legs were shaking as I walked up the stairs. Or it could have been when I waited outside my apartment and a friend ran in to collect something for me, and I looked up and my cat was looking down at me and meowing in recognition, and I couldn't go up to him. Or it could have been when I got my last suitcase out. Or when I group emailed his family, or straight after I had sex with another guy for the first time and I rolled onto my back and I breathed. Or when I boarded the plane.
Oh, I love to go out fishing on a river or a creek.
Yeah, man.
I don't enjoy it half as much dancing cheek to cheek. Dance with me. I want my arms around you. The charm about you will carry me through heaven. I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak. And I seem to find the happiness I see when we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek.
So that was Baludurung. Baludurung is the Wiradjuri word for the platypus, and the work kind of loosely pivoted around this story that I remember my grandmother telling me when I was a kid about how the platypus came to be. And the story is the story of a kind of a mutant creature who's the offspring of a duck and a duck and a water rat. And I think that of all the stories that my grandmother told me when I was a child really clung to me, because I've always felt a little bit like a mutant. I was a queer boy growing up in a very strict Christian household. I grew up with my white father, but would then spend weekends, with my white mother, but would then spend weekends with my black family in summer, and so I always kind of felt like I was a kind of a fish out of water. I then lived for a long time in Israel, and I was not Jewish. So that story of feeling like a mutant was kind of the pivot point for this work. And I made this work, and I was working with a producer in Melbourne, and the idea was that it was going to happen in a hotel room. And I wanted to do that classic thing where I was going to turn the stage into a hotel. And he had this kind of light bulb moment where he was like, why don't you do it in a real hotel room? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And so we did it. We got a local hotel here in Melbourne to give us a room, and we put on a season in the Fringe Festival. And so I stumbled onto a few things that have become really integral to my creative practice. One is that I discovered the promenade form, so making a work where there is no separation between myself and the audience, where I move through the audience. And it's also participatory, so the audience is constantly being invited to participate in different ways. Could be something as simple as, here, could you just hold this please? Or I get them to do whole scenes with me. In that video, you saw someone was invited to roll me a cigarette because I had bubbles on my hands, and I got the audience to dress up in dressing gowns and to dance with each other. And the other thing that I discovered when I made this first work of mine was a love of the interdisciplinary. So I came from a very kind of dance background. I'd always done that, dances are supposed to be seen and not heard. But I just rediscovered my love of writing and the spoken word. And so my works have become an interweaving of dance, word, spoken and written, and audience participation. And I have been gradually kind of extending and scaling that up in my practice over the last 5 years. And that's been really inspired by a lot of research I've been doing into Wiradjuri ceremony. So I was at the National Library of Australia a couple of years ago. I was a Creative Arts Fellow, and I had the opportunity to delve into the archives left behind by an anthropologist called R.H. Matthews. And I've also been spending a lot of time talking with my own elders, especially my father, Christopher Kirkbride, and I've been developing a really close and beautiful relationship with the elders and the community around Wagga Wagga, including Auntie Mary Atkinson, who Ian mentioned at the end of Crystal's speech. And yeah, so through this kind of consultation with elders and doing research into the archives, I've been really fascinated by the nature of ritual. And one of my observations in that is that in ritual, in a ceremony, there actually is no audience. Even witnessing is a form of participation. So I always kind of joke that I kind of giggle when when I hear white fellas saying, "We've discovered this amazing new thing. It's interdisciplinary, site-specific durational work." And I giggle because, of course, we've been doing that for 100,000 years. And so the work I make is really rooted in this research that I've been doing about ritual and about the nature of it, and how there is no separation between the performer and the audience. Also, those divisions between the different genres of theatre, visual art, music, dance, they're very strange Western inventions. They come from that kind of Western European desire to be able to strictly categorize everything and to lock everything off. And of course, I think the beauty of First Nations art, and including performing arts, is finding that the richness is actually in the spaces in between. It's in the blurring, it's in the hybrid, it's in the interdisciplinary. These ceremonies that we have always performed on this country were, on the one hand, works of art. They involved dance and song, but they were simultaneously kind of encyclopedias of knowledge about the landscape, about family genealogies, about the law, about history, about medicine. And so that's what I've always, that's what I'm fascinated by in First Nations culture, in Wiradjuri culture specifically in my work, is how the one act, the one event can be coded and layered with so much information, and that gets lost when we try and separate everything out into its kind of categories. So from Buladerang, I made another work called Daddy, and I'm just going to show you a quick trailer of that. So Daddy, as you can see, is a scaled up version. So it's a work that no longer fits in a small space like a hotel room, but is in a larger kind of black box space. The work is, my dad jokes that the work's about him, and he's kind of a little bit right. The work is about the patrilineal line through my father. And it came from the observation, a kind of a frustration at hearing, a lot of right-wing commentators and a lot of kind of ordinary folk as well will say, "Oh, blackfellas should just get over it. Colonization is something that's happened in the past, and everyone's equal now, and we should just kind of get on with it." And I kind of get where they're coming from, but I wanted to make a work that said, no, actually, colonization and the effects of colonization are something that we're living and experiencing now as blackfellas. And in my family, I can draw a direct line from the moment Captain Cook came and planted the flag on this continent down to my generation and my siblings. I can see the effects, the ongoing effects of colonization in poor health, poverty, low rates of education, domestic violence, and all the other kind of societal impacts that we've seen. But sometimes I think just kind of statistics, just kind of numbers, they don't really mean anything. So I wanted to make a work that kind of zoomed in on the personal and really examined that through the prism of trauma, and in particular child sexual assault through my family history. And I did that in deep and profound consultation with my father, whose story it is. And he was really generous and literally told me, you know, people need to hear this story. So it's about the daddies in my line, you know, my grandfather and going back. And it's also about the men I'm trying to have sex with. It's about trying to kind of zoom in on the search for love and what that's like today in this increasingly digital and isolated world, what that's like to be a fair-skinned black fella, queer man, trying to navigate love. And it's also about me growing old. I think I was approaching 40 when I made this work, and so it was a bit about me kind of facing my own impending daddyhood, if you like. And so through this work, I really kind of continued to explore the things that I was really interested in. It was participatory, as you saw in that little script, in that little clip that I just showed. The work kind of started off and the audience wandered in, and I was kind of appeared to be floating on a cloud. And the whole work has this kind of constant reference back to different art forms, so like Western versus First Nations, like Aboriginal art. So there's all these references to kind of like Botticelli and the Sistine Chapel and kind of high European art. And there's this weird thing of this black fella who feels more comfortable there, you know, more comfortable kind of doing ballet than I am doing traditional Aboriginal dance. There's something more comfortable for me because of the way I've been brought up, and because of colonization, and because I was so disconnected from my culture. There's this kind of comment on how comfortable and how easy it is for me to slot into that kind of Western kind of art framework. So I get the audience to come in and they kind of like hold grapes and they fan me and they hold up backdrops and they kind of help me make all these kind of very classic tableaus that are famous from Western art. And then so from there, I kind of gradually escalate the ask. Getting audience members to participate in work is really my craft. It's the thing that I spend probably the most amount of my time figuring out how to do it in such a way that is consensual, so no one ever feels like they're being bullied or cajoled into anything. We've all been in that horrible situation in stand-up comedy, you know, where the comedian is like picking on the person in the front row. Everyone has a little bit of trauma and a bit of fear around participatory work. So I take my commitment to my audience really seriously, and I have developed a whole kind of suite of tools, I guess, that allow me to gently invite the audience in rather than kind of bullying them into it. And so there's a moment where and the other theme that happens in this work is a theme around sugar, you know, around the fact that when the colonizer arrived here, they took away our traditional food sources and they replaced it with literally bags of tea and sugar as rations. And sugar is also this kind of metaphor that I keep returning to. It's this kind of, because there's something about the loss of innocence of a child who was a victim of sexual assault. And so there's this, they keep using this sugar reference. I get the audience to like sift the icing sugar over me while I make this kind of, like a music box kind of ballerina moment, and then I go and invite the audience to like lick the sugar off me in a comment on our collective complicity in the colonial project. And then eventually we go through this whole journey. I kind of struggle with, there's a moment where I'm like picking up the Wiradjuri language app and you see me trying to contort my mouth around the words, and there's a whole nother scene where I'm trying to contort my body into a Bangara-esque style. And so it's about this kind of struggle that I think is really common for a lot of contemporary black fellas, about feeling really disconnected from their culture, but trying to find it in any way that we can. And then the whole thing ties up in the end with this big crazy scene where everyone is gleefully covering me in icing sugar and chocolate syrup and marshmallows and raspberries and turning me into a big kind of weird sundae dessert. So the work really continued those things that I was interested in about participatory promenade and interdisciplinary work. And in particular, it focused on my work being very autobiographical and about myself and my family. I've been making a few more works like that, continuing my interest in all of these themes, and I'm making a new work with Chunky Move, which is a contemporary dance company here in Melbourne, and I'm going to premiere in December my largest work to date, which will really be a homage to Wiradjuri ceremony, and I have been making that work really hand in glove with the community in Wagga Wagga, with the elders, in particular with Uncle James Ingram, and also with Auntie Mary and Auntie Cheryl. And I've been going up regularly and yarning with the elders and visiting country and being taken out to sites and learning the stories of the place. And we're going to keep going up with the creative process as we make this kind of large-scale work that's around gathering, around corroboree. And the other project that I have been making in collaboration with the Wagga community is the work that I have made and that was commissioned by the National Gallery of Australia for Hetty Perkins' 4th National Art Triennial. The work is hanging in the triennial at the moment, and here is a little video kind of preview of the work. So the work is called Giraro Galingana Giri, which means the wind will bring the rain. And I started thinking about the work in the middle of the deep dark lockdown down here in Melbourne. And I was meditating, when it felt like the world was on fire, literally during the bushfires. I've been finding solace and succor in zooming out and trying to think. It's impossible to do actually, but trying to think about time and this country from the perspective of country, from that kind of geological scale of millions, billions of years. And when I think about it like that, our human problems kind of become really small. And so this work is a kind of a meditation on that, on the ancient enduring cycles of nature. And it also speaks, I think, to the diasporic experience of many blackfellas who carry the history of country. I remember each time I go back up to Wagga Wagga and I land and I hear the particular combination of bird song and I put my feet on the soil next to the Murrumbidgee, I have this profound sense of home, of arriving, and that kind of the way in our bodies that we as blackfellas carry that memory of country. We made the work in collaboration with filmmaker James Wright and composer Daniel Nixon. We went up to country, we yarned with the elders about the right sites to go and work. And so actually the work is full of sites that the local Wagga Wagga people will go, oh yeah, I recognize that. They were chosen for various reasons, including some of them were really significant sites of, boundary trees and scarred trees and corroboree grounds. We filmed myself kind of gently inhabiting the space, and we also shot kind of footage without me in it. So footage of like water, of trees, of grasses, and then we used chroma key technology, which is basically green screen technology. So when I danced, I had this bright pink paint on me. And in fact, some of the shots you can see me applying the paint, and that's a real kind of nod to our ancient ceremonial practices of painting up. We would do it with ochre. I was doing it with bright pink paint so that we could chroma key it out. And then using this green screen technology, we kind of subbed in footage of the country, of water, of these different textures into my body. And so it got that kind of beautiful effect. We shot it in 6K, and then at the gallery, we mounted it on the walls in a series of 7 screens. They're about 50 centimeters wide, so it's quite large. And the room's dark and you get to go in, and it was a real pleasure at the opening weekend to watch kind of passers-by come and sit down. It's all shot very slow. It's all shot in slow-mo, and the whole thing has that meditative quality, and I could see passers-by sitting and pausing and kind of getting a little bit like blurry-eyed, and it was really beautiful because it means that the work landed in the way that I really was hoping to. The work loops to, and so it appears to have no end, and it has a beautiful sound score that's made of actual field recordings from country. So you'll hear the sounds of especially the cockatoos down by the Murrumbidgee. And this was my first work, my first kind of visual arts work, and it was one that came out of a bit of necessity, I think. I couldn't go and perform live during the middle of lockdown, so I started to muck around with the screen a little bit more. And I have really enjoyed it. I really love it as a form, and I'm really interested in doing more kind of video work and works for galleries. Though it was interesting because as a performing artist, I am guaranteed that the audience will sit there for the length of the show because they bought a ticket, and that's, you get in, you can't get out. So it was really interesting then to present my work in an exhibition context where audience members could just wander by and glance at it and go, oh, that's nice, and walk on. It was kind of crazy, I guess, like to think about, like, because I looked at all the other works in the exhibition and then all the other works in the gallery. Each one of those works represents sometimes years of labor, and the nature of a gallery is that the audience gets to pick and choose what they watch and how long they stand in front of an artwork. But yeah, so I guess like the context of it has been really interesting for me. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to like chat about. Ian, are
we on? Hello. Oh my goodness, Joel, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you.
Thanks.
I was just saying to the tech team, we had the pleasure, like 1.5 hours each way from Sydney to Gosford. Every day we'd catch the train together to Dark Indian country and would just share stories. And I learned so much from you, Joel, and you're an extraordinary man. What I really admire about your work is I'm hearing the concept of country that lives within our internal geography of the sum of ourselves, and how you're using that to mobilize your identity, and you're working in collaboration with the diversity of your clan groups, of your people, with the Wiradjuri. It's so special, Joel. So you should be rightly proud, as your elders are. And as Nick, the director of the gallery, has noted, the National Gallery's Indigenous Arts Leadership Program was just recently in Wagga Wagga, working with the wonderful elders out there, as noted, Uncle James Ingram, Auntie Cheryl Penrith, Auntie Mary Atkinson, Auntie Jackie Ingram, so many wonderful elders, and of course the beautiful Senior of the Year, Isabel Reed, who we love. And Joel's been doing some really beautiful work out there. And whenever I go out there, Joel, I want you to know all the elders are coming up to me going, Joel Bray is amazing. And of course, Uncle James Ingram, 3 weeks ago, was down in Melbourne working with you, if I'm not mistaken, with Chunky Move. So he's bringing our elders into this space and mobilizing those conversations. I love that you talk about loops and this concept of slowly, the Yinjamara, right? And what I find so interesting about our cultural dance forms, particularly I note my experiences of WAG Newtown High School Performing Arts and doing dance with you with Auntie Kathy, what I found so unique about our cultural forms is its repetition and how that repetition takes us, as you've noted, to that meditative state. And this was referenced in Hetty Perkins' conversation this morning about the use of repetition to connect us to ceremony. Would you like to explore that a little bit, Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. Looping movement forms are a classic strategy to enable the participant to enter a trance state. A really classic one is the Sufi spinning of the mob from Turkey. And we absolutely have that. And you see it, whether it's the repetition of dots and crosshatches in visual art, but you also see it in our cultural dance. And so the work that I make is I'm often kind of trying to muck around with time, with duration. So like making things go longer than they feel comfortable, for instance, kind of enables you to get the audience to like be with you, and then they kind of lose you, and then they kind of re-find you again if you like stick with it. And in this work for Giraro Galingana Giri, I worked with a really deliberately limited choreographic palette. So a lot of it is either just kind of swaying from side to side, or it's this kind of like particular like circular looping kind of noodling, we called it. And yeah, that's an absolute homage to those looping forms from traditional dance. And it keeps reappearing, right? You even dance inside a circle, and then when you dance in a group, you circle each other. It's like this constant kind of, it's the nature of also the way we think about time and the way we think about like history is not a linear line. It's like it's a spiraling circular thing.
Two questions, because I'm conscious of our time. One is, thank you, Joel. Do you see language and spoken word and movement / the body being intertwined rather than separate parts of your practice?
Absolutely, yeah. I write, literally the way I start my creative practice on day one when I walk into the studio, I set a timer on my phone and I write stream of consciousness for 10 minutes, and then I read it to myself, and then I dance in response to what I wrote, and then I write in response to how I danced, and then I dance, and I just keep looping that, talking about looping again, because there's something for me about that both things are integral to the process. I need to write / speak eventually and move. I also think of like writing, the way I write and the way I talk is choreographic. So I'm using my choreographer's toolbox of like rhythm, repetition, acceleration, deceleration, these kind of like retrograde, these kind of classic tools that we use as choreographers. I apply them to the way I write and to the way I deliver spoken text. And likewise, when I'm making movement in a kind of a storyteller kind of a way. I'm like finding, it won't not necessarily be illustrative, it's not mime, but I'm kind of like, I might take this story. For instance, I spoke earlier about the story that my grandmother told me about the platypus, and use that as the inspiration to find the work. Yeah, so for me, the three things of audience participation, writing, and movement are actually all intertwined. They're all on the same spectrum.
And what's interesting is, reflecting on today's presentations, Hetty's and Crystal Hurst, is this exploration of the amalgamation of our multi-intergenerational and multidisciplinary approaches of understanding culture, right? That song, that story, that dance, they are all in relationship with each other. And that is so clear in what you're talking about. And again, you're going back to that loop and that repetition. What I think is very interesting, brother, what you do really well, from my experience, is how you exhaust your palette and then use, as you're saying, the choreographic tools of dynamic variances to explore new ways of understanding that palette. That's very unique, and that's in that repetition. The next question I note, Joel, is that, thank you, Joel. Again, everyone's thanking you. You mentioned some references to a famous European artworks that you did in your recent work, which I believe you did in Perth, Daddy. What other influences have you done or have you used artistically in your practice? Can you explore that a bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some kind of artists I keep returning to. One is Jean Genet, who is was a French kind of like very queer artist who wrote plays, made films, did photography, and his was kind of very iconoclastically kind of like politically charged queer artist, so I often return to his work. So one of my recent works, called Considerable Sexual License, had a whole scene where I reimagined his play The Maids, performed by two maids in a colonial kind of two Aboriginal maids in a colonial kind of mansion on Wiradjuri country. I also, Daddy had a lot of inspiration inspired by like Pierrette Gilles, photographers, makes lots of pop references. So I'll be really interested, like there's a lot of Madonna and Kylie in there. As well as to Wiradjuri designs. I work a lot with I kind of get a little bit frustrated with that not enough is, in my opinion, not enough is being done to highlight the unique arts designs of the south east of the continent. This very kind of interesting geometric kind of patterns that kind of you see in our burial trees, for instance. So I'll work a lot with those kind of art references.
Joel, an absolute pleasure to see you. I miss you. And the last time we saw each other, we were at my table with the cats and talking for hours on end. Berry and Pumpkin, the Wonder Cats. And they miss you. So come back to Canberra soon so that we can have a good chinwag and a good yarn. We are so grateful to have you explore your work with us here today, brother, and how you understand your identity through your cultural expression. You should be rightly proud, as I am, of you. So Joel Bray, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.
Thanks, brother. Thanks all. Have a great conference.
That now takes us to our third postcard by Manua Nalinga. Once the film has finished, we will then take a short break for lunch. Our full-day online delegates will return at 2 p.m. for our 2 online workshops. Please note that this is in your online portal system to determine what one you attend. I also note that our participants on site at the National Gallery can join us for lunch now in Gandel Hall until the afternoon workshops start at 2 p.m. sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone in between, thank you so much for today so far, and we'll see you soon. Enjoy lunch. See you back at 2 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
important that we look after Muslim and countryside, That's why I'm doing it on country Chukupa in Cambridge. I like the color, Nice one. Vaya, good color. My Chukupa is strong. That's why I is keeping it in singing. Bugali